Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to Villanova Tip Time. Today is Saturday, February 20th, 2021, and we are psyched for a big return to old Big East matchup against University of Connecticut, former old Big East foe, playing our first Big East matchup against UConn since 2012. So it's been almost a decade. Before we get into today's matchup, which you'll see on Fox coming up at the top of the hour, we're going to go, as normal, we're going to go around the horn at the top of college basketball, follow some of the big games and big storylines we're seeing. We're going to break down what we're seeing from the tournament outlook at present, what we're looking at for Villanova, what we're looking at for Big East teams. What are some things that jump off the page to me overall? We are then, unfortunately, going to talk a little bit about the Creighton game last Saturday, which I'm sure all of us have had the week to sort of stew on. We're going to talk a little bit about what we saw there, what we learned from it, and what we can take going forward. And then we're going to get into this year's UConn squad, welcoming them back to the Big East, where they're at now, what we can expect to see from them, and then ultimately, getting into keys to the game and what you can expect to see today before we bring you right into tip-off at the top of the hour again on Fox. So lots to break down because we haven't seen you since last Saturday. We've had a whole week, like I said, to unfortunately stew in what I've defined as a quote-unquote want to break the TV kind of loss at Creighton, where they were seemingly just automatic, hitting everything. There were definitely some defensive breakdowns, leaving more open looks than you'd like, but they were also hitting sort of like the no business, crazy, chuck 'em up shots. And sometimes they have a day like that. The only thing I'll say, and the reason I'm covering this to start the show, is because Villanova has been the team that loses that kind of game in February only to win that kind of game in March. And oftentimes it's been against opponents like Creighton who have been able to win that kind of game and go off on a random Saturday in February, but then don't show up in March, as Villanova has been able to under Coach Wright in recent years. So we call that a learning loss. As we were checking in with one of our resident experts, Joe from Boston, the only thing that slightly concerns us there is, it's February. There's not, because of the long COVID layoff, there's not enough time. There's not as much time to make the defensive adjustments that need to be made and learn from that kind of loss the same way you could as if that was like, sort of January timeframe. But alas, there is plenty of hope for us as Villanova remains a top 10 team in the nation, depending on where you look for your bracketology insights. Still trending as a 2 seed or a 3 seed, and I think with easily an outside chance still to get on a 1 seed, given the fact that a lot of the teams ahead of them are Big Ten teams that are going to cannibalize each other. Alas, before we jumping the gun here, I'm eager to get into today's game because I'm excited for some Cats action since it's been a whole week. But before we get into anything about today, let's talk a little bit about what we're seeing around the top of college basketball. Jumping off the page to me, and unfortunately for some of the crowd I mingle with, as many of you know, my wife is a Wisconsin Badger. Number 21, Wisconsin did indeed have a pretty tough week, losing 2 home games to number 3, Michigan on Sunday, and then to number 11, Iowa on Thursday. That's a tough week for a Wisconsin team that many were saying when the selection committee rankings came out last week, that they were the team that was outside of that top 4 that could make some moves and get in there and be a threat. You see them go in the wrong direction with 2 losses, albeit to top 10-ish teams this week. Whichever team sees Wisconsin in the tournament as a 5 or maybe even a 6 seed at this point is probably not going to like to see them there. So that's an interesting storyline to follow. One of the other games that jumped out to me this week was number 16, Florida State, taking down number 7, Virginia, pretty handedly on Monday. And the storyline around Virginia, technically the reigning champs because they won in 2019, and of course there was no tournament in 2020. The storyline around Virginia is they're struggling to earn any quality wins. If you look at their resume, they don't really have many quality wins. All of their quality win opportunities are their losses. So interesting point to note. You take that 2019 title out of the mix. I believe it was 2018 that they were the first 1 seed to lose in the first round. Is this Virginia team, sort of that early tournament upset waiting to happen? Maybe. Keeping an eye on that. So some fun ones to watch today beyond Villanova, which I'm sure if you're watching this right now, you're probably going to be tuning into the Villanova game at the top of the hour on Fox. Also, coming up at 2 p.m. Eastern, you have 15 Texas Tech at 23rd ranked Kansas. That's going to be on ESPN. And you have 13th ranked West Virginia at 12th ranked Texas at 3 p.m. Eastern on ABC. So both a couple of Big 12 matchups of top 20 ranked teams. Before we get into sort of a tournament breakdown, just a couple Big East notables this week. Seton Hall notched 2 wins this week to keep their name in the conversation to be in the big dance. Currently, most bracketologists have them as in. With this week with home wins against Marquette and DePaul. So nothing terribly signature there, but humming along and keeping their name in the conversation. And both UConn and St. John's have continued their surges, for lack of a better term. St. John's had a blip on the radar with a sort of a bad loss after their Villanova upset a few weeks ago. UConn has stayed competitive, even though they lost James Bouknight in January, which we'll get into a little bit more in a second. But they, continued. They got Bouknight back on Tuesday and notched a pretty convincing win over Providence. So when you look at the tournament overall for the Big East, you've got Villanova, Creighton, Xavier, and Seton Hall all in as of right now. So that's good news. And sort of segueing into the overall topic of tournament and looking at the tournament, the bracket that I'm going to reference most specifically is going to be Joe Lunardi from ESPN. He's sort of the, I hate the overuse of the term GOAT, but he's the original bracketologist, right? He was bracketology before bracketology was like a big mainstream thing where all of the major sports outlets had their, full bracketology coverage. I feel like Joe Lunardi is one of the names who stood in the mix the whole time. So he's sort of the old reliable that I find myself gravitating towards. And if you look, I named Villanova, Creighton, Xavier, Seton Hall all as kind of in right now. You look at, Big East has 4 teams in. They could get as many as 5 or even 6 in because you've got UConn listed as his first overall team out, meaning you're very likely looking at a win and you're in scenario for UConn today. If they beat Villanova, that's pretty much going to get them into the tournament, most likely. And similarly, you have St. John's as one of Joe Lunardi's next 4 out. So right, sort of on that bubble, and sets up a win and you're in scenario for them if they can accomplish the season sweep against Villanova coming up later this week. So lots of interesting things happening as far as Big East and the bubble, and Villanova somehow smack dab in the middle of it, even though Villanova's trending for one of those higher seeds. So like I said, Villanova's right now, I think you see them as a 2 seed at present as of last night. They're as a 2 seed in the Gonzaga region of the bracket. That would make Nova, Gonzaga's the top overall seed. So that would suggest that Nova's sort of the bottom 2 seed, the worst of the 2 seeds, which is fine. I actually sneaky love this. I've been on the record every episode of Villanova Tip Time so far, at least since in the new year, right? That Gonzaga is awesome. Gonzaga looks great. They're a great team. They had a stacked non-conference schedule in November and December, which, normally I would say they do a decent job in the non-conference, but it's always been a storyline that like Gonzaga's strength of schedule is just lighter than everybody else's. Well, this year they went out and stacked their non-conference and they ran the gamut. They ran through it. They're undefeated. But the problem is they haven't played anybody good since the turn of the calendar year. So you have to like seeing Gonzaga in your bracket if you're a team from a major conference where you've been playing that higher level of competition night in and night out. Now, how much does that hold for a team like Nova as a 2 seed where you wouldn't see Gonzaga until, the Elite 8 theoretically, if you were going to play them? Because by the time Gonzaga gets to the Elite 8, they've made it there. They've already sort of dispelled that notion of the their conference schedule somehow being less than or making them less prepared for the tournament. But all the same, I like Villanova as a 2 seed in that region, and being able to match up against Gonzaga if Nova has the kind of shooting day that they've had at times this season where they've cracked 50% or even cracked 60% in a few isolated cases. So a couple of the one seeds that I'm looking at, just looking at the overall bracket, a couple of things that jump off the page. And again, this is Joe Lunardi's bracketology page on ESPN.com. You have Gonzaga, as it stands right now, Gonzaga would play either Oklahoma State or San Diego State in the round of 32. I think that's super compelling because it sort of puts my argument to the test, right? Gonzaga's played a really light schedule that might not have them super as tournament ready as some of the other power conference teams. You figure they're going to get past their 116 matchup, although not a foregone conclusion like it may have been years ago. But you figure they get past that one. But then who's going to be waiting for them in the round of 32? You've got two really formidable teams. You've got Oklahoma State, coming out of that Big 12, and then you've got San Diego State, which is another really sort of powerful mid-major type of team. Both presenting Gonzaga a really tough test there in the round of 32 for the first overall seed. And then also, as far as one seeds with that first weekend potential trouble, Ohio State would play either LSU or Loyola Chicago in the round of 32, as Joe Lunardi's bracket currently stands. That was an interesting one to me as well. If you look at the 4-5 and the 3-6 seeds in the bracket as it is right now, you're looking at some potential amazing matchups in the round of 32. Just to read a couple off based on how the brackets that currently stand, the projected bracket currently stands, you would have Texas Tech versus USC in the Gonzaga region. Again, this is all in the round of 32. You would have Texas Tech and USC in the Gonzaga region. You would have Tennessee and Wisconsin playing in the Baylor region. You would have Virginia as the 3 seed and Missouri as the 6 seed playing in the Baylor region. You would have Florida State versus Kansas in the Michigan region. And in the Ohio State region, you've got an absolute murderer's row here of a 4-5 game between Texas and Creighton and a 3-6 game between Oklahoma and Virginia Tech. So even though this is all highly speculative and there's still, most of these teams have somewhere between 5 and 7 games left, depending on where they are as far as like making up games that have been postponed. And then you have conference tournaments, which is going to get crazy as you're hearing the talk of teams possibly withdrawing from conference tournaments because of the COVID risk and not wanting to be taken out of the NCAA tournament. So you have a lot of moving and shaking left. This is highly speculative, but in the end, it gets you pretty jazzed up for the NCAA tournament. So transitioning into, before we get into this UConn team and today's game, we're going to talk a little bit about last Saturday's Creighton game, just so that we can shake that off, talk about what we saw, and move forward from it as we've been trying to do all week. So like I said, last Saturday was definitely a quote-unquote want to break the TV kind of game. Creighton came in with that must-win attitude, and Villanova didn't, and it was as simple as that. Although I will say, and what I had actually queued up for a few minutes later, what we're saying there, one thing I did love is that the Villanova won hustle points all game. There was no give up from this team, even though it was sort of in the middle of the second half and it was clearly Creighton's day. Still had the feeling like Villanova might sort of mount a late surge because they were hustling. They weren't giving up. They were winning the hustle points. They were winning the hustle plays, particularly in the first half where they were able to keep it close. They went into halftime down 6. Creighton was shooting lights out. Villanova was not, but Villanova was all over the floor chasing down loose balls, getting a lot of offensive rebounds. They weren't ultimately able to do that same, keep it at that same clip in the second half, which allowed Creighton to pull away and sort of win easily. But Villanova was definitely there from a hustle points perspective and way better than I think what we saw when they lost at St. John's, where it looked like they were just sort of like didn't really know what to do down the stretch when they were down. You saw no give up in this team. So that was a nice adjustment that you saw, because it would be foolish to think that heading into March with conference tournaments and the NCAA tournament, that Nova's just going to be leading wire to wire. So having that ability to maintain that attitude and maintain that hustle when they're down a few points is going to be huge to making a deep March run. So that was, I'd say, the positive takeaway. The negative takeaway was probably defensively, and it was a combination of less than great defense and Creighton just shooting lights out. So there were a lot of defensive breakdowns that allowed open shots, but there were plenty of shots where guys had hands like right in their face, throwing up no business threes that were going down nothing but net. I'm thinking of a few of those Mitch Baylock balls that went down out of nowhere. Justin Moore had 21. Jermaine Samuels had 16 points. They both had good games, but we saw an emerging theme here that Villanova is beatable especially when an opponent can stop one of our Naismith boys. I call them the Naismith boys. Jeremiah Robinson-Earl and Colin Gillespie, both on the Naismith, top 20 finalist list. But respectively, we're 3 of 13 and 3 of 12 from the field last Saturday, and that's not going to do it. So the key to success is if you can shut both of those guys down, Villanova's going to have a tough day. And even with Justin Moore and Jermaine Samuels having nice games, it wasn't really enough to stay competitive in this one. It brings up a theme to me of, the basic question of, in life, there's the predator and then there's the prey. It's one of those two, right? It's one of those two extremes. So is Villanova the predator or is Villanova the prey? When Villanova is able to adopt that predator mentality and really bring that swagger and get all of their guys involved, no worries from me, and I'm sure not a lot of worries from you either. But when Villanova allows itself to get on the ropes, play a game against a Creighton team like they saw last Saturday, a St. John's team like they saw the week prior, and a UConn team like they see today coming in, are you the predator or are you the prey? Because you could argue that Villanova is the prey. UConn wins this game and they're in. So Villanova needs to bring that predator mentality to this game. Sort of that we're the top of the table for a reason. We're the predator. And I think unfortunately Villanova's allowed in many of their games, they've allowed themselves to almost take on that prey sort of mentality because the other team is bringing their best shot, right? And Villanova's trying to sort of settle into their routine, and it's not matching up on the intensity at times. So that's a theme I'm looking for, and looking to see if they can kind of identify that and bring that, predator, bring the intensity today against a UConn team that is desperate for this W. So looking at the clock, we've got about 4 to 5 minutes left before tip-off. So let's talk about this year's UConn squad and welcome them back to the Big East overall. So we haven't seen UConn in a Big East game between Villanova and UConn since 2012. Not going to go into that one. Many of you might remember Shabazz Napier, buzzer beater with like 0.6 seconds left in overtime. Not awesome. That was the last time we saw them. It was almost a decade ago. It wasn't the last time we saw them. It was the last time we saw them with a Big East patch on their uniform. 2014, UConn beats Nova, upsets Nova in the round of 32 on their way to an unexpected UConn title, adding to a storied Connecticut trophy case. And then in the mid to late 2010s, Nova and UConn inked a 3-year non-conference deal, the first 2 matchups of which Nova blew out, I think won both games by 20-plus points. The third of those matchups came last year in 2020 in January, where Nova was able to come back late and hold off Coach Danny Hurley of UConn's team, who held the lead late in that game. Villanova was able to come back and hold off against the upset and notch that win. And Coach Hurley did have words after the game to the effect of, we're coming for those guys. We're going to get them. So expect that UConn is going to bring a lot of emotion into today's game, because it's not only big for their sort of series, the rivalry series, but it's huge as they're that team that's right on the outside looking into the bubble. It's a win and you're in scenario for them. You can't understate the amount of intensity you should expect to see from UConn today. And especially considering they were able to maintain as a competitive team while they were without their star player, James Bouknight, who was out with an elbow injury since early January. They just got him back on Tuesday, and he scored 18 points in his first game back. So he's the guy you're gonna key in on, James Bouknight. He's averaging 20 points a game, 5 rebounds a game, one of the best players in the Big East this year. They also have a pair of guards both averaging around 12 points a game, who carried a lot of the load while James Bouknight was out. Those 2 guys are Tyrese Martin and RJ Cole. RJ Cole is a guy whose number you heard called quite a bit while James Bouknight was out. And then another one of their players I find compelling is forward Isaiah Whaley, who averages 8 points and 6 boards. So he's probably their most prominent, bigger presence. So with about a minute left, what should you be watching for in today's game? Villanova has struggled a little bit defensively. That's not a secret, especially as of late, especially in some of these losses. The keys to the game against UConn are a little bit more simple. It's keeping Bouknight manageable. If you can keep him relatively contained and allow him not to go off, Nova's going to have a major edge in this game. And while we've seen that, slightly poorer defense from Villanova lately, this is a more clearly defined test where you really just need to shut down that single go-to guy. And Villanova has previously had success against teams where that's been the case. So that's definitely a reason for optimism today. and why Villanova's favored. I believe last I saw was favored by 7 points. Another key to the game is that Nova needs to get all their guys involved, right? As we talked about earlier, last week it was Justin Moore, Jermaine Samuels having a good game, and everybody else sort of having an off night. That can't happen. That's the recipe for success for opponents of Villanova. And Villanova opponents know it. Villanova knows it. And we need to figure out a way to get more of our studs in the rotation, more guys clicking, fewer guys having an off night. Hello, Captain Obvious. Have fewer guys playing poorly means you're going to play better. But it just seems like that's a clear-cut key to the game. Nova's not going to rely on one guy or two guys to get it done. It needs to be a team effort. And it brings us in closing back to this concept of being the predator or the prey. So when Villanova adopts the predator persona, all those starters are contributing, like we talked about, as a key. And we're getting some added intensity from our bench guys. Let's not slide into prey mode today, where we have a less talented team coming in, talented in their own right, as UConn may be, but less talented overall than this Villanova team. But UConn's coming in, they're bringing the emotion. They're coming in hunting for the W. So can Villanova figure out a way to be the predator, or are they going to be UConn's prey? I'm going to leave you with that thought. I'm super excited for tip-off. I'm super excited for this game. You're going to find it over on Fox. That's all for me. Ladies and gentlemen, it's tip time.